As gaming is raking in more money than ever, we have to ask the question, are we in a new gaming renaissance, or is this just a pandemic-related fluke? Well, there's only one thing that we can do, together, as a people of course, and that's check it out! And welcome to another sensational Sunday. I'm Mike, and I am here to talk all about these record-breaking gaming sales. But before we hop into that, I want to respond to the comments from last week's video. It was about the Bloomberg story related to Sony kind of hindering smaller development studios from doing anything internally in Sony, and also I touched on the whole MLB being on Xbox Game Pass situation. So Brian Thomas said, if Sony keeps this up, they're going to lose this generation, which is bad for gamers overall, not just PlayStation fans. I do understand why MLB did what they did, though. Baseball isn't as popular among the younger generation as basketball, football, and even soccer. So to help increase popularity and to hit that demographic, it makes sense for them to want to have the game on all platforms, not just one. So what Brian said made a lot of sense, especially about the MLB part. It really doesn't make sense for that to be a PlayStation exclusive because, like I said, baseball just isn't as popular as the other sports, and having it on one platform really limits it. And then them doing the deal with Game Pass is going to get it into more people's hands because it takes out that barrier of entry of having to pay full price for the game. If you already subscribe to Game Pass, you get it for free. I do agree with what he said about Sony's behavior, and that I do think ultimately it could lead to them not doing as well as they could do this generation. As far as losing the generation, I don't think there's really going to be a loser, because like Brian said, like, it's good for all gamers if PlayStation does well. Like, even if you're on the Switch or on PC or on the Xbox, if Sony does well, everybody does well. Same thing with Microsoft, same thing with Nintendo. If they all do well, it's good for gaming. And some of Sony's behavior recently is just like, come on. I think what got me the most was their behavior around cross-platform gaming, and with them focusing on bigger games, which makes sense as making them the most money, but it kind of feels like they're losing their way and going in a new direction. I mean, they're still going to pump out good games. Like, I'm sure the next Horizon will be good, and they have a lot of good things coming up in their lineup, but I don't want to see them lose what essentially made them popular in the first place. And with that being said, that's going to lead us directly into today's topic. So I came across this article in Engadget that was basically talking about how there's this huge increase from last year in gaming sales. Like, they're as high as they've been since 2008, March of 2008, which was like Xbox 360, PS3, and the Wii. You know, that was that generation. So this is the first time that they've hit record sales like this in March, which of course some of it you would expect because there was 2 new consoles, and before this it was like 7 years before we had a console drop. So yeah, going into this year is very different than even last year, because I know the pandemic started and people were stuck inside, but I also felt like people were apprehensive to buy new consoles because we already knew that the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and Series S were coming out. So I don't think people were really going to rush and buy those consoles. We did see the Switch sell out last year, you know, around the pandemic time. It was like impossible to find for a little bit, but they recouped and they were able to get units back out on the market relatively quickly. But now the combination of people just wanting things more than ever, like we see this with the graphics cards, everything selling out. There's a semiconductor shortage. People are still stuck at home. So now everything is just getting absorbed. And of course, with everything going on, the PS5 has become the fastest selling console. So that was one of the things they mentioned in the article. PS5 has been selling really well. This article didn't mention anything about Xbox, but I'll get into that later. But yes, PS5 has become the fastest selling console, as of right now at least. And there's a lot of things that Sony did right this generation. First of all, the design, whether you like it or hate it, it's eye-catching. I think it's pretty cool. It's a bit impractical, like now that I have one and finding a place to put it, but it's a very cool eye-catching design. Then you also have the controller with the adaptive triggers and the built-in microphone, which, speaking of that, apparently the PS5 DualSense controller is the #1 selling accessory for March 2021, or it was. Of course, there's the games. They just dropped Spider-Man Miles Morales for PS4 and PS5, along with the PS5 remaster of the original Spider-Man game. They have Ratchet & Clank coming up, Sackboy's Big Adventure. They also had the Demon Souls remaster, which personally is not a game for me, but they do have some games that you can play if you buy the system right now. So to touch on Xbox, they mentioned that this information came from NPD and they didn't mention anything about the Xbox. And I think it might just be because they're selling 2 different consoles versus Sony. Sony, technically, yes, there's 2 different versions of the PS5, but horsepower-wise, they're the same, and they're around the same price. It's just one has a disc drive and one doesn't. So maybe it's harder to get unit sales from the Xbox because there's a Series S and the Series X, and they're both at different power specs, and I don't know if Microsoft has specified, how many of each units they've shipped. So maybe that's why Microsoft was left out. But either way, I do believe that the reason that the PS5 is selling more than the Xbox is just because they have more systems, because they're both just selling out instantly. I feel like if there were as many Xboxes available as PS5s, then they probably would be tied as far as sales, and they probably would both be the fastest selling systems of all time. I would be very close. So I looked it up, and I found an article from a couple months ago that kind of estimates how many units were shipped by December 30th of 2021. And it was estimated at that time that Sony had shipped 4.5 million PlayStation 5s, and Microsoft was like 1 million behind them. So that kind of puts it into perspective. If they were like 1 million systems behind, like production wise, that would make sense why Sony is selling more, because if you go online and try to find either system, even the Series S, it's gone in like seconds. So I think right now the key to like winning sales wise is just to get the systems made and get them out to people. But I'm glad to see that people are buying the Xbox, because Game Pass is a great value, and I'm really excited to see what people think of the Xbox, because a lot of people skipped out on the Xbox One, and that was really a great system. My favorite games happen to be on Xbox, and I mentioned this a few times, but I'm going to be playing them on PC, so I won't be getting this Series X. But I hope that Microsoft really does well, because Game Pass is a great value. Sony has great first-party tentpole games as well. I want both of them to be successful, because like Brian mentioned in the comment at the beginning, it's good for gaming in general. But don't think I forgot about Nintendo, because despite PS5 being the #1 fastest selling system of all time, for March 2021, Nintendo actually sold more consoles than they did. So Nintendo actually did the best last month as far as sales, which is surprising, because you have a 4-year-old system going against 2 brand new systems, not even a year old. Are they even 6 months old at this point? No, they're not even 6 months old. So you got a 4-year-old system going against these new systems, and you would think that people wouldn't be interested in the Switch, but Nintendo did such a good job, and they've consistently done a good job with carving out their own niche, except for the Wii U, but we don't talk about that anymore. Carving out their own niche and just putting out some of the best first-party games. Like, their first-party lineup is strong. It has to be strong, because in reality, they always build a system that's not graphically as powerful as the current generation, so sometimes it's difficult for third parties to bring the same games over to that platform. So they really have to rely on themselves to put out the best games for their systems, and they have some really compelling titles. They also have the Pokemon games coming up. Of course, you have Breath of the Wild 2 and then Metroid Prime 4 somewhere on the horizon. They'll come out eventually, but you do have those games coming up. But most importantly, the article points out that game sales for March, #1 was Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, which that's a cross-platform game and not just last generation, but current generation, so that makes sense why that would be #1. It's a pretty popular game. But #2 was Monster Hunter Rise, and of course that's a Switch exclusive game. And surprisingly, they mentioned #6 is actually Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is old and crusty. Like, how is that game still selling so much? That just proves like how valuable Nintendo's first party is, so it makes sense why their console is still selling gangbusters after 4 years without even having like a major redesign or a more powerful console, which I do believe is probably coming soon. But I'm really happy for Nintendo, because that Wii U era was kind of rough. I'm not gonna lie, you all. Like, whew, that Wii U, ugh. But yeah, seriously, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe came out in 2017, and really it was just a re-release of a Wii U game that came out in 2014. So we're talking about a 7-year-old game, really, that's still charting. Like, it's still way up there in the charts. So that's really good, all things considered. And overall, I just feel this generation is a lot more exciting as far as the consoles that we have versus the last generation. I felt like PS4 and the Xbox One were both kind of boring, and then the Wii U was just it wasn't, it was an okay system. It was okay. I just felt like the consoles this generation, especially with the SSD, Sony's controller stuff, Nintendo finally bridging their handheld and home console together, like, they're way more exciting this generation. So I think that's part of the reason that the sales are up. There are compelling reasons to buy it. Even without any games available, the fact that both PlayStation and Microsoft right off the bat have backwards compatibility with the previous generation. Of course, Microsoft's compatibility goes back to 360 and Xbox, whereas PlayStation is pretty much just PlayStation 4. But the fact that you could just carry your games over and play them on these new systems, and then of course you get the enhanced graphics if they have like a PS5 or Xbox Series X version, it makes it a much easier transition to move to this generation. So I think from that standpoint it makes sense. And then the pandemic does add to it, so I don't know if these systems would be selling as much as they did if it wasn't for that. I have a feeling even if the pandemic wasn't happening, that they would still be selling well. I don't know if they'd be reaching record numbers like they are now, but I think that these systems that are out right now are just a lot more compelling than what we had previously. I'm just happy that we're able to celebrate gaming and more people are going to be gaming than ever. So let me know what you think. Have you been involved in the whole trying to buy a PS5 or Xbox kerfluffle? Because I did get frustrated a few times when I was trying to get the PS5. So I'm just curious. And overall, what's your favorite system out of either the current or last generation? Let me know. I will be back on Wednesday. I'm going to check out WWDC. And if there's some good stuff, I will do a video on it on Wednesday. If not, I will be doing another different Apple related video. But I am shifting from gaming this week to do something a little bit different. So make sure to stay tuned. And until then, if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to tell a friend, tell a coworker, like, share, and subscribe, and always do at least 2 things at the same time.